love, pain, truth.
The snow was falling heavily outside the large glass window, covering the city in a thick, quiet blanket of white. Inside the penthouse, however, the silence was not peaceful. It was heavy and suffocating. Isabella sat at the long dining table, staring at the plate of food in front of her. The roast chicken was cold now, and the vegetables looked dry and unappetizing. She had spent hours cooking this meal, hoping that tonight would be different. She had hoped that tonight, her husband would actually come home. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve. The candle in the center of the table had burned down low, the flame flickering weakly as if it was about to give up. Just like she was. Isabella let out a long, shaky breath and stood up. Her legs felt heavy as she walked to the window. Below her, the city lights were glowing, and she could see families walking together, holding hands and laughing. Everyone else seemed to be full of joy, celebrating the holiday with the people they loved. But up here, in this expensive, empty apartment, Isabella felt completely alone. Sebastian, her husband, was not coming. He hadn't even called. This was the third year in a row that he had broken his promise. Every year, he swore that this Christmas would be the one where he left the office early. Every year, he said she was the most important thing in the world. But every year, the business came first. Sebastian was a billionaire, a man who built empires and ruled boardrooms. But he didn't seem to know how to rule his own home. Isabella pressed her hand against her stomach. A few hours ago, her life had changed. She had gone to the doctor because she hadn't been feeling well for a week. She thought it was just stress or maybe the flu. But the doctor had smiled and congratulated her. She was pregnant. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she remembered sitting in that sterile, white room. She had been so scared, but also so incredibly happy. She imagined telling Sebastian. She thought he would smile, maybe even cry, and hold her tight. She thought a baby would fix them. She thought it would make him realize that work wasn't everything. But sitting here, in the dark, looking at the untouched food, she realized how foolish she was. A baby wouldn't fix a broken marriage. A baby deserved to be loved by two parents, not just one. A baby deserved a father who didn't treat his family like an afterthought. If Sebastian couldn't make time for her on Christmas Eve, how could she trust him to make time for a child? The anger began to rise inside her, pushing away the sadness. She was tired of waiting. She was tired of being the supportive wife who smiled and nodded when he canceled plans. She was tired of sleeping in a king-sized bed alone. She turned away from the window and walked into their bedroom. It was huge, filled with expensive furniture and designer clothes, but it felt like a hotel room. There was no warmth here. Isabella walked into the bathroom and opened the cabinet above the sink. She took out a small paper bag. Inside was the ultrasound picture the doctor had given her. She looked at it for a long moment. It was just a blurry gray image, but it was her baby. Her heart ached with love for this tiny, unborn child. That was why she had to do this. She had to protect her baby from growing up in a house full of silence and neglect. She walked over to the marble counter and placed the ultrasound picture down, right next to the bathroom sink. Then, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the positive pregnancy test stick she had taken earlier. She placed it right on top of the photo. It was a message. It was the loudest thing she could say without using her voice. Isabella walked back into the closet and pulled a small suitcase from the top shelf. She didn't pack much. She just grabbed some clothes, her toothbrush, and her passport. She wasn't running away forever, maybe just to a hotel or back to her sister's house a few towns over. She just needed to get out of this cold, beautiful cage. When the suitcase was zipped shut, she stood in the middle of the room and looked around one last time. The diamond necklace Sebastian had bought her for their anniversary sat on the dresser. It was worth more than most people made in a year, but right now, it meant nothing to her. She left it there. She grabbed the handle of her suitcase and rolled it out of the bedroom. The wheels made a soft thumping noise against the hardwood floor. She walked down the long hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. Every step felt harder than the last. She loved Sebastian, she really did, but she loved herself enough to know that she deserved better. She reached the front door and placed her hand on the cool metal handle. This was it. Once she walked out that door, she wasn't sure if she would ever come back. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the wave of guilt that tried to wash over her. Just as she began to turn the handle, the sound of the elevator broke the silence. Isabella froze. She could hear the mechanical whir of the lift rising up to the penthouse level. Her heart skipped a beat. The numbers above the elevator door dinged as they counted up. Ding, ding, ding. For a second, she thought about hiding. She thought about running into the guest room and pretending she was asleep. But her feet were rooted to the spot. She was tired of hiding. The elevator doors slid open with a swoosh. Sebastian stumbled out. He looked like a mess. His usually perfect tie was loosened and hanging crookedly around his neck. His expensive coat was unbuttoned, and his hair was sticking up in different directions. He looked breathless, like he had been running. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Isabella standing by the door with her suitcase. The color drained from his face. "Bella," he whispered. His voice sounded rough and tired. "What are you doing? Where are you going?" Isabella looked at him, really looked at him. He smelled like cold air and expensive cologne, but mostly he smelled like exhaustion. He didn't look like the powerful billionaire the world saw. He just looked like a tired man. She couldn't find the words to answer him. If she spoke, she knew she would start crying, and she didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She just gripped the handle of her suitcase tighter. She saw his eyes drop down to her bag, and then his head snapped back up to her face. Panic flashed in his eyes. It was a raw, real emotion that she hadn't seen from him in a long time. "You're leaving me?" he asked, his voice cracking. The silence of the apartment rushed back in, filling the space between them. Isabella looked into his eyes, filled with a sudden, terrifying realization, and she slowly pulled her hand away from the door handle. She didn't run, but she didn't stay either. She just waited for the inevitable crash. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, and the sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. Isabella was gone. Sebastian stood frozen in the entryway, his hand still reaching out to the empty air where she had been just a moment ago. The panic that had flashed in his eyes earlier now turned into a cold, heavy stone in the pit of his stomach. He looked around the massive foyer. The marble floors felt like ice under his feet. He was alone, truly alone. He looked down at the suitcase handle that was still burning in his memory. She hadn't just said she was. It looked like a scene from a movie about a lonely marriage. He felt a sharp pang of guilt twist in his chest. He had promised her. He had sworn on his mother's grave that he would be here for Christmas Eve this year. And once again, he had let the business dictate his life. He ran a hand through his messy hair and walked toward the master bedroom. Maybe she left a note. Maybe she was just in the bathroom, cooling off. But when he walked into the bedroom, the closet door was open, and he could see empty spaces on the hangers where her favorite coats used to be. She wasn't coming back tonight. The light was on in the bathroom. Sebastian walked toward it, his footsteps slow and heavy. As he stepped into the bathroom, he saw something sitting on the marble counter. It was small and white, standing out against the dark stone. He frowned and walked closer. It was a plastic stick, a pregnancy test. His breath hitched in his throat. He picked it up with trembling fingers. There were 2 pink lines. Positive. Next to the test was a small piece of paper. It was an ultrasound printout. He stared at the black and white image, his eyes blurring with tears. There was a tiny little bean, a tiny heartbeat. A baby. He was going to be a father. The realization hit him with so much force he had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from falling over. A baby. Isabella was pregnant, and he hadn't been there. Suddenly, it all made sense. She wasn't just leaving because of a missed dinner. She was leaving because she was scared, and she was doing it alone. She probably thought he didn't care. She probably thought he would be a terrible father. The test wasn't a happy announcement left for him to find. It was a goodbye note. She was taking their child and leaving him because he had made her feel like a single wife. "No," he whispered to the empty room. "No, no, no." A rage boiled up inside him, but it wasn't at her. It was at himself. He had spent the last 3 years working himself to the bone. He had been fighting off competitors, handling mergers, and building a security wall around their finances. He had convinced himself that he was doing it for her. He thought that if he just made enough money, if he just secured the company enough, they would be safe forever. He thought he was loving her by providing. But he was wrong. He had been hiding his love behind work. He was so terrified of something bad happening to them that he forgot to actually live with her. And now, because of his fear, he was losing the only 2 people who actually mattered. Sebastian shoved the ultrasound picture and the test into his coat pocket. He spun around and sprinted for the door. He couldn't let her go. Not like this. Not tonight. Not on Christmas. He slammed his hand on the elevator button, pacing frantically as the numbers slowly descended. The waiting was torture. Every second that passed was another second she was getting further away. He didn't even know where she would go. Her sister lived in the next town, but it was late, and the buses wouldn't be running often. She was out there in the cold, pregnant, and alone. The doors finally opened. He jumped inside, smashing the lobby button repeatedly. He burst out of the building and into the freezing night air. The snow was coming down harder now, swirling in the wind. He didn't feel the cold. He just felt the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He ran to his car, a black luxury sedan parked out front. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped them. He started the engine and peeled out onto the street, not caring about the snow or the slippery roads. He had to find her. He drove slowly, scanning the sidewalks. The city was quiet. Most people were already home with their families. The streetlights cast long, lonely shadows on the snow. Please, please, let her be safe, he muttered over and over. He drove for 10 minutes, his heart sinking lower with every empty block he passed. Then, just as he was turning a corner toward the main bus station, he saw a figure sitting on a bench. It was her. She was huddled into her coat, her small suitcase resting against her legs. She was staring down at the snow, looking the loneliest he had ever seen her. Sebastian slammed on the brakes. The car slid slightly before stopping at the curb. He didn't wait for it to fully stop before he threw the door open and jumped out into the snow. "Isabella," he yelled. She looked up, startled. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. When she saw him, she didn't smile. She just looked tired. She grabbed the handle of her suitcase and stood up, turning away from him as if to walk into the dark. "Don't walk away from me," Sebastian said, his voice breaking. He ran through the snow and grabbed her arm gently, turning her around to face him. "Why are you here, Sebastian?" she asked, her voice quiet and trembling. "Go back to your work. Go back to what's important." "You think work is important?" he shouted, the frustration exploding out of him. "You think I care about money right now? You care enough to miss Christmas," she said, a tear spilling over. "You care enough to leave me alone every single night. I'm not doing it anymore. I can't do it for the baby." Sebastian reached into his pocket and pulled out the ultrasound picture. He held it up in front of her face. "I saw it," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know." Isabella gasped softly, her eyes widening. She looked at the picture, then up at him. "I left it for you," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I left it so you would know why I'm leaving. I'm not going to raise a child in an empty house, Sebastian. I'm not going to have a child who only sees his father on holidays." "I wasn't working just for the money," Sebastian said, stepping closer to her. The snow was landing on his hair, melting on his face. "I wasn't trying to ignore you. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Isabella laughed bitterly. "From what? A happy marriage. There are people, Bella. Rivals. People who want to hurt me," Sebastian said, his voice intense. 3 years ago, I got a threat. Someone said they would target you to get to me. I was scared. I was so scared of losing you that I pushed you away to keep you safe. I thought if I built a wall around us, if I made us unbeatable financially, then no one could touch us. I worked day and night to destroy those threats so I could finally breathe again. Isabella stared at him, her mouth slightly open. The wind howled down the street, but neither of them moved. "I was a fool," Sebastian continued, tears finally streaming down his face, mixing with the melting snow. "I thought I was being a hero, but I was just being a coward. I was hiding behind my desk because I was terrified of something happening to you. And because of that, I almost lost the most important thing in my life." He reached out and took her hand. "I saw the picture. I saw the test. I'm going to be a father. And I swear to you, I am done hiding. I am done being the CEO who is never home. I don't care about the company. I care about you. And the baby. Please, don't go. Come home. Let me be the husband you need. Let me try to fix this." Isabella looked down at his hand holding hers. It was warm, despite the freezing air. She looked back at his face. She saw the desperation, the love, and the regret pouring out of him. He wasn't the cold billionaire anymore. He was just Sebastian, the man she loved, begging for a second chance. The silence stretched between them, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of their breathing and the distant hum of the city. The wall that had stood between them for 3 years was cracking, breaking down under the weight of the truth. "What about the threats?" Isabella whispered. "I handled them," Sebastian said firmly. "There is nothing more important than you. There never was. I just forgot how to show it." Isabella squeezed his hand tight. "You have a lot of making up to do," she whispered. Sebastian let out a breath that felt like he had been holding it for 3 years. "I know," he said. "I plan on spending the rest of my life making it up to you." He pulled her into a hug, wrapping his coat around her, shielding her from the snow. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like the start of something new. The ride back to the penthouse was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence from earlier. The car heater was blowing warm air, melting the snowflakes that clung to their hair and coats. Isabella sat with her head leaning against the cold glass of the window, watching the streetlights blur by. Sebastian drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding hers tightly, as if he was afraid that if he let go, she would disappear again. When they stepped back into the apartment, the atmosphere felt completely different. The grand rooms didn't feel like a museum anymore. They just felt like a place where two people lived. Sebastian locked the door behind them and turned the deadbolt with a decisive click, shutting out the rest of the world. "Sit," he said gently, guiding her toward the living room couch. Isabella sank into the soft cushions. She was exhausted, the kind of tired that goes all the way to your bones. The adrenaline from leaving and the emotional explosion in the snow had drained her. Sebastian knelt in front of her and took off her wet boots. He pulled a thick, fuzzy blanket from the back of the sofa and wrapped it around her shoulders, tucking her in like a child. "I'm going to make you some tea," he said, brushing a stray hair away from her forehead. "Don't move." Isabella watched him walk toward the kitchen. It was such a strange sight. Sebastian, the man who usually paid people to do everything for him, was filling the kettle himself. He wasn't on the phone. He wasn't checking his email. He was just making tea. A few minutes later, he came back with 2 steaming mugs. He sat down on the coffee table right in front of her, so close that their knees touched. The steam from the tea swirled between them. "I meant what I said outside," Sebastian started, his voice low and serious. "About the threats. About why I worked so much. I believe you," Isabella said softly, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I just wish you had told me. I spent 3 years thinking I wasn't enough. I thought you didn't want to come home to me." Sebastian closed his eyes for a moment, looking pained. "That was my mistake. I thought I was being strong by carrying it all alone. But I was just being stubborn. I look at you now, and I realize I almost lost the best thing in my life because of my ego." He paused, placing his hand gently on the blanket covering her stomach. "And now, there is this." The tension in Isabella's chest finally began to loosen. She looked down at his hand. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted with a small, honest smile. "I never thought I would be a father. I didn't think I knew how. But I want to learn. I want to be there for every doctor's appointment, every morning sickness, every cry. I don't want to be a father who just sends money." "You're going to have to change your schedule," Isabella said, a hint of playfulness returning to her voice. Sebastian nodded vigorously. "Done. As of tomorrow, I am delegating more. I already drafted a resignation letter for half my board duties in my head on the drive over." They sat there for a long time, talking about things they hadn't discussed in years. They talked about names, about moving to a house with a garden instead of a high-rise, about how they used to stay up all night talking when they first got married. It was like they were rediscovering each other, peeling back the layers of stress and silence that had covered them for so long. Eventually, Isabella's eyes began to droop. The warmth of the tea and the safety of the room made her sleepy. "Come on," Sebastian said, standing up and offering her his hand. "Let's go to bed." Isabella hesitated for a split second. The bed had been a lonely place for so long. But when she took his hand and he pulled her up, she knew it would be different. She left the cold, untouched dinner sitting on the table. They walked into the bedroom together. That night, the silence in the apartment returned. But this time, as they lay curled up under the heavy comforter, Sebastian holding her from behind with his hand resting gently on her stomach, the silence felt like a warm hug. There were no empty spaces between them. For the first time in a long time, Isabella fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The next morning, Isabella woke up to sunlight streaming across the pillow. She reached out, expecting the other side of the bed to be cold and empty. But it was warm. The spot where Sebastian had been was still radiating heat. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and heard noises coming from the kitchen. She walked out of the bedroom, following the smell of fresh coffee. The living room looked different in the daylight. The snow was still falling outside, turning the city into a winter wonderland, but inside, it was bright and golden. The cold dinner from the night before was gone. The table was cleared. In its place sat a plate of croissants and fresh fruit, things he must have run out to find early in the morning while she slept. Sebastian was standing by the window, looking out at the view. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Merry Christmas, Bella," he said softly. Isabella walked over to him. "Merry Christmas." He pulled her into a hug, kissing the top of her head. "How are you feeling? How is the baby?" "Tired," she admitted, resting her head against his chest. "But happy." Sebastian pulled back slightly to look at her. His eyes were serious, filled with a promise. "I know I can't fix 3 years of silence in one night," he said. "And I know I have a lot of work to do to earn your trust back. But I am going to spend every single day trying. I want this baby to know who its father is. I want you to know who your husband is again." Isabella smiled up at him. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "I think we can start with breakfast," she said. Sebastian laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the room. "Breakfast? And then, maybe we can look at that list of baby names again." They sat down at the table together. The giant penthouse didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of possibility. The silent Christmas night was over. It had exploded with truth, with tears, and with the news of a new life. As Sebastian poured her a cup of coffee, Isabella placed a hand on her stomach. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect. They would argue, and they would make mistakes. But as she looked at the man she loved, the man who had chased her into the snow, she knew they would be okay. The silence was gone, replaced by the noise of a new beginning.